Hello and welcome to my video about my reading experience for the books in BookTube Prize Quarterfinals Translated Fiction Group B. Yeah, there are altogether 6 books. I actually planned to do something like a vloggy video, but I did film some footage, but I did not like those. so I scrapped them. I deleted them. They're not around anymore. They don't exist in this universe anymore. So you are stuck with this. But yeah, this is going to be my ranking video for all of the 6 books that I read, and I would say overall my reading experience in this round was a much better one compared to the last round, the octafinals that I had for fiction. You can check it out in the link below. But yeah, I enjoyed this in a way, because out of all of the 6 books that I read, I would say I only disliked, I wish I don't have to dislike anything, but I did dislike one book, and obviously that's going to be at number 6. I'm gonna talk about the book at number 6 first, and I'm gonna go all the way up the list to number 1. And so at number 6 I have 3 o'clock in the morning by Gianrico Carofiglio, and this one was translated from the Italian into the English by Howard Curtis. So this is a book about how a son and a father, they bond with each other over a period of about 2 days in which they don't go to sleep. So what happens basically is that the son has a certain epilepsy related condition since he's a kid, and apparently when they go to Marseille to see a doctor, the doctor suggests that in order to check whether the son, who is already a teenager by that time in the 80s, the doctor suggests that just to see if the condition is still there, the son would need to undergo some kind of stresses that would stimulate his body and see if the seizure happens or not. So he recommends that the son go without sleep for about at least 2 nights or so. And the father, who is accompanying the son, he doesn't have to stay awake the whole time, but he chooses to stay awake with the son during that period. So a bit of context: before this appointment, the son and the father, they are not exactly very close to each other. The parents have divorced, I think, or at least separated, and so the son is not exactly really close to his father. But because they are going to stay awake in a foreign city, they're Italians, but they go to Marseille, they basically use this time to sort of bond with each other, do things around town. And at first I thought that this book was quite nice. It does seem to have that kind of direction in which it's a book about reconnecting between family members, and I thought it was nice in a way. It did feel kind of like a Hallmark television film. So yeah, it does have that kind of somewhat of a sappy feel to it, but not too much. At the same time, we have these 2 characters, both males. Both of them are interested in things that are sort of intellectual. You know, they are interested in literature, in science, in philosophy, in math. The father is a math professor, and so they start to talk to one another. They start to get to know one another, and they would also frequently discuss on, you know, these shared interests, which sort of borders around the area of pretentiousness to me, but I sort of dismiss it as, you know, this is the characterization of these characters. I usually don't like those kinds of discourse, to be honest, you know, those kind of like over-the-top intellectual discussions, but it seems like these characters like to do that, so I thought it was a nicely written, you know, it was a nice way to write these characters, I suppose. But then, as I read this novel, my rating sort of started to drop bit by bit, until, and it was mostly because it just didn't go anywhere. Like, it just felt kind of monotonous, but it was still fine. But then there was something at the end, towards the end, that just literally changed my overall rating of this book into 1 out of 5 stars. I really hated what happened, because I sort of had this suspicion about this book, but I was expecting that this book could probably subvert my expectation, but it did not. What happened with one of the side female characters and the son character in this book, towards the end, it sort of pissed me off, because it made this book like, you know, it turned this book into this really stereotypically European macho kind of a book, a very stereotypical dick lit of sorts. You know, to think that this book actually started out as a sick lit, it changed into a, I would say, rather bad dick lit, and I just, you know, I did not like it. I literally just put like only 1 star for this book. Yeah, automatic bottom position for me. So yeah, did not like this book at all. But the rest of the 5 books, I sort of enjoyed them. Although the next 3 books I'm gonna talk about, they were sort of middling for me. I wouldn't say that they were like really wow, but they weren't bad either. I mean, I would certainly recommend these next 3 books, and of course the final 2 books, which are like amazing. But the next 3 books were like 3 stars, and so the ranking doesn't really like say much, like in terms of differences between these books. The next book is at number 5. But I thought it was a nice book also. I would definitely recommend it, and it is Civilizations by Laurent Binet, translated from the French into the English by Sam Taylor. Oh, this book is interesting. And it is kind of like a alternate history kind of a book, in which you have a hypothetical situation. What if the Vikings actually explored more than just North America, and then they explored all the way down to South America, in which they get in contact with the Mesoamerican civilizations over there, and sort of introduce certain things to them that would allow these civilizations, the Mesoamerican civilizations, to sort of receive some kind of a head start in terms of technology, you know, being able to arm themselves prior to them being discovered by the Spanish later on, and what actually transpires after the Spanish actually discovers them, and you know, with these South American civilizations, the society, the culture already having some, you know, some advancement in terms of how to arm themselves, protect themselves, basically. And I think it's interesting in that sense. It's kind of like a thought experiment sort of a book, and it explores what exactly happened after that. And this is not exactly a spoiler because it's also part of the book's description, like how the people from the Mesoamerican culture actually ends up invading Europe instead. And so I think that's really interesting. But yeah, I guess when it comes to this book, I guess that's all there is to it. Personally, I think if you are a history buff, especially when it comes to these areas and these histories, I think you would definitely find this interesting. But as a casual reader, I think that of course it is always precious to read this book beyond what you do as a casual reader. And so I definitely think that that was something that I did. I certainly find it interesting, but there is also another aspect of this book which I find is sort of not there, and that would be me as a reader being able to tether myself into this book. I don't feel connected with this book. I wouldn't say at all, but I just didn't really feel that connection. I wasn't really able to, anchor myself emotionally or in any other way with whatever that is happening in this book. So it ends up feeling kind of dry to me, even though the writing style is actually quite varied. It's not written in the same style throughout the book, so it's not dry in that sense, but it's just sort of dry in the sense that I just don't really feel much from it. When something happens in this book, I would just feel like, okay, that's it. So yeah, I'm not feeling much from it, but I still think that it's a really interesting book. It's a really, with a really interesting premise. Definitely recommend this one as well. The book that I put at number 4 next was by Simone de Beauvoir and translated by Sandra Smith. It's called Inseparables. So this book is sort of like a autobiographical fiction, inspired or based on de Beauvoir's own personal relationship with a real life friend. So this book is about, of course, the friendship between a girl in France. I think it's early 20th century France. This girl who befriends the other girl. And from the beginning, there is this kind of like, this sort of like a foreshadowing that their friendship is going to be like sort of doomed in the end. There is going to be like a tragic ending for this friendship. Like they are not going to be like holding hands and be happy forever after that. So there's definitely that feeling lingering in this book in the beginning, and I would say it's kind of an interesting book in the sense that it is very short. But at the same time, the dynamics between the protagonist and her friend in this book, it changes into something a bit blander towards the end. In the beginning, we can certainly see that there is this sort of like difference between the protagonist, who is a young girl, and also her friend, who is a young girl. Her friend seems to be like more free-spirited, someone who lives above, or rather beyond, the conventions of society. She's like the rebellious character, whereas the protagonist is kind of like the nice character, the goody two shoes. And what I like about this book is how it actually explores not just the friendship, but how the main character is experiencing some kind of change in her own personal worldview, like her own personality, because of her friendship with this friend, and how this friend influences her. And so she learns things. So, you know, the main character is still the main girl, the protagonist, and she learns from the story. But towards the end, I would say the two characters, they start to feel sort of similar to each other. Like the friend, and I think it's probably because the protagonist is experiencing some kind of a maturation. Like at first, her view of her friend is very idealized. It's I would say it's definitely very biased. You know, her friend is like, oh my gosh, so amazing, so special, so unique. She is definitely infatuated with her friend in the beginning, but eventually her friend just sort of eventually she becomes someone who is normal. And so when that happens, both characters, they feel kind of like similar to each other. And I suppose maybe this is because it is kind of like based on the writer's own personal life, perhaps. And so it starts to mimic real life, in which, you know, stories in real life are sort of boring and chaotic. They don't really follow like conventions of a novel. So yeah, it feels a little bit boring at the end. Also, what else? The novel feels a little bit rushed, and usually I don't complain if a novel is short. But in this case, I think that the novel is kind of... it's too short. It feels a little bit rushed, and I feel like I don't have enough time to connect with these characters. So yeah, I guess in that way it was just kind of like a 3-star read for me. Definitely recommend this as well, especially if you love the, you know, the famous Neapolitan Quartet by Ferrante. You might see some kind of similar vibe in this book as well, and it's also very short, so you know, you could probably read it like one day, and like me, I read it like in 1 week, because, you know, I'm a slow reader. Anyway, next book, also a 3-star read, 3 out of 5 stars, by David Grossman, and translated from the Hebrew into the English by Jessica Cohen, and this is More Than I Love My Life. Yeah, out of all of the 3 books that I gave 3 stars to, this one I put at the highest position, in fact, out of all 3, because I think that this book is, overall, is a, it has some kind of consistency with it. This book is about the life story of 3 generations of women, starting with, well, not exactly starting, but you have the older woman named Vera, who was once a political prisoner in a political prison on an island off the coast of Croatia. But when she was a prisoner, it was Croatia was once under Yugoslavia. So she was a political prisoner over there, and she experienced torture, and you know, the things that she experienced over there is just really horrible. And she has a daughter with her, and after that she moves to Israel, in which she marries a man, an Israeli man, who also has a son. Now Vera is someone who is kind of loved by many people around her. Like, people like Vera as a person, but because of the experience that she has, you know, and of course her daughter also experience all the trauma as well because of Vera being absent from her life due to her being in prison. Nina, her daughter, has a rather wrought relationship with her mother, and so there's definitely this kind of conflict over there. And Nina would eventually have a relationship with the son of the man that Vera marries, and their relationship produces a daughter who is Vera's granddaughter named Gilly, who is also the narrator of this book. And so this book is sort of like the relationship, the family story that happens especially between these three women, and it kind of explores the impact of intergenerational trauma, especially horrible things that arise due to external factors, and how it really impacts a family's dynamic. And I feel that this book has a consistent tone in which the entire book just feels sort of, it is not depressing. It is sad, of course, the book is sad, but it's not depressing, but it's melancholic, I would say. And you could certainly feel for the characters. But one thing that I feel that this book isn't really working that much for me is how verbose it can get. And also that sort of leads into making this book feel kind of monotonous. So yeah, I wasn't really like, the book wasn't exactly a page turner for me because of this, but it was really interesting also. It has a nice premise, it has a nice story, it has a nice consistent tone, which I definitely appreciate. So yeah, another book that I would recommend as well. So yeah, those three books are all of my 3-star books. So I'm gonna move on to the final 2 books, my top 2 positions. All 5 stars. The second one is actually very close to the first one that I'm giving 5 stars to, and that would be Bolla by Pajtim Statovci, and it was translated by David Hackston from Finnish into English. Okay, so this book is kind of like it's a blend of a war fiction and queer fiction as well. So it's a really interesting blend, and from, I would say, what you can expect from that kind of blend is that you can certainly expect a lot of trauma. So it's not going to be like a really breezy, fun read. Those two things, when they mix together, it's going to be like horrible in the sense that the contents, the story is going to contain a lot of horrible things happening to the characters, not in the sense that the book is going to be horrible, because I thought that Bolla is a wonderful book. Anyway, this book takes place mostly in the 90s. It is about the relationship between 2 men. One is Arsen, who is an Albanian living in under the Kosovan War, together with another character named Miloš, who is a Serbian. And just a little bit of background: Albanians and Serbians, they aren't really like super friendly with each other, and it is especially explosive when the Kosovan War happens. But these guys, they meet each other and they fall in love, and they start to do things that lovers do. But obviously, because of the things that are happening around them at that time, their relationship is not going to be breezy. At the same time, Arsim, who is the main character in this book, because he's gay, he doesn't want people to know that he's gay, and he ends up marrying a woman and has a family with her. They have children, but Arsim becomes a really, really abusive person. He beats his wife, he beats his children. He's an all-around horrible person. So you have this really horrible person as a protagonist, and what it does is that you sort of have conflicted feelings towards this character, because this story is about him and his relationship with his boyfriend, his lover, but at the same time you also know that he has a family with a wife who is a genuinely nice person, by the way, and you develop this conflicted feelings and opinions about this kind of person. And I thought that it makes this story really, really wonderful, because it paints a very messy and very violent story that takes place around the time when a country is literally torn by armed conflicts. This book is a lot. There's a lot to unpack with this book. It's definitely very violent. It definitely contains a lot of homophobia. But overall, it is a heartfelt story. Not heartfelt in a sense that you would want to say "oh" to the characters. You might, but I would say that's not the main reaction you're gonna have. But it's definitely a sad book. Definitely something that I would highly recommend to everyone. To read this book. This is a really wonderful, wonderful novel. I really love it. Just really awesome. And that leaves us with the final book, and that would be Disquiet by Zülfü Livaneli, and translated from the Turkish into the English by Brendan Freely. This book obviously is a wonderful book as well. So this book is about this journalist who finds out that his childhood friend, has died, and apparently his childhood friend was murdered, and so he returns to his hometown, which is very close to the Turkish-Syria border. And in his hometown, there happens to be a refugee camp where refugees from Syria, war-torn Syria because of ISIS. There are many Syrian refugees going from Syria to Turkey, and they settle down at the camp. And so his friend is someone that he has known to be like really nice, really kind and gentle, and he is obviously really perplexed as to why this really nice and gentle friend ends up becoming a murder victim. Because the circumstances around his death is sort of violent, and he sets out to find out more about why he dies, what are the things that happen to this friend when he dies. And he finds out that prior to his death, his friend has been engaging in a relationship with a Syrian refugee, a woman who happens to be a Yazidi, and this woman has a child. And so obviously in the rather conservative and pretty much racist hometown, his friend is his friend literally faced a lot of flack because of his relationship with this woman, all because he's a kind person who sort of tries to do a lot of things in order to to help this Yazidi woman. And not to mention that, yeah, like I said just now, the hometown is also quite racist, especially to Yazidi people. So there's a lot of layers, and our narrator slash journalist protagonist, he ends up peeling a lot of these layers around the circumstances of his friend's death, and he ends up in a position in which he feels despair. He questions things, and so that is where the story takes off. I love this story exactly because of the kinds of layers that we could get from this novel. Obviously, this novel talks about racism, persecution, discrimination, but it doesn't talk about those things in a very black and white way. When we talk about how the Syrian refugees flee their native country, it is because the native country is being attacked by ISIS. So obviously there's element of persecution and discrimination there. Discrimination is an understatement. Definitely violent persecution. But when these refugees end up in a neighboring country and they face further persecution by the local society, there's also another layer when it comes to the story of what it means to be persecuted. So there is so much to unpack in this novel. And another thing that I really like also in this book is the idea of doing good onto others and what we consider to be the way to help people. And this book, it sort of looks at this in a very critical way, in the sense that maybe we as more privileged people, when we see the plight of others, we would feel sympathy. Okay, that's all fine, so what are we going to do about it? And this novel actually poses another question: why do we do it? Is it because we are inherently good people and we just want to be, good people? Or is it because we want to convince ourselves that we are good people? And so, because if that's the case, maybe, just maybe, it's a case of vanity. Definitely something that this novel explores. I am not going to give you further details, especially with this aspect. So, that's just a little bit of teaser if you have not read this book. But yeah, I really love how this novel explores that, our effort to help others. Angelina Jolie makes a cameo in this book, so that's interesting. She also interacts with the protagonist in the book. A teaser, not a spoiler. But yeah, a lot of things, but I especially like that part. And the ending of this book, also has elements of that question, the motivation of doing good onto others, right? But the ending, this book, I would say, part of it is sort of like a coming of age of sorts, in which a character learns something new about themselves and the world and whatnot. And usually in coming of age books, you expect that the characters would learn and transform into this like beautiful butterfly at the end. But at the end of this book, the character learns something. But I like that there's this feeling that something is amiss. Like even after learning, we feel that it's not the end of the journey. There is still something to be improved, still something to continue. And I like that feeling about this book. It feels real, and it feels kind of gritty in a spiritual sense. And it feels like you're being called out. So yeah, I think I gave a lot of teasers about this book. So obviously, because I love this book so much, and I would definitely recommend everyone to try this book if you have not read it. Yeah, also another thing, oh my gosh, I know I am talking a lot about this book, but there's also this, I've seen reviews about this book talking about how one particular character, the Yazidi woman that I mentioned just now, who is in a relationship with the dead friend, her character in this book is sort of portrayed as someone who is voiceless, right? And I feel I noticed that some readers, they are not exactly comfortable with the fact that you have this character who is persecuted and who is written to be voiceless. But I like that. It feels like it fits with the narrative of this book. It feels like it fits with the intention of this book, which is basically the struggles of the voiceless. And that idea, the struggle of the voiceless, is also very wonderfully interwoven with the idea of the motivation of doing good to people. All of these things are connected, and they're connected like really seamlessly. So good. Anyway, I'm gonna stop. I hope that you're intrigued enough, and you're probably, I don't know, online browsing this book and maybe click add to cart. But then again, I don't really fancy myself an influencer. Anyway, I'm gonna stop this video now, and that's all I'm gonna say about these books. But if you have anything else, anything you want to comment about these books, maybe you love some of these, maybe you hated some of these, if you have any strong opinions, or if you don't have any opinions, you just feel like you're interested in reading this book, anything, feel free to comment down below, and maybe your comment is going to, I don't know, inspire further ramblings from me. Anyway, I'll see you again in a different video, so until then, take care. Thanks for watching, and bye.